Welcome back to Trends Recapper. Today we'll be recapping a romantic drama film called Malèna. Renato, an Italian boy of 13 years old from Castelcudo, remembers when Il Duce, Mussolini, told the whole country that he was going to war with France and Great Britain. Renato got his first bike on the same day. Renato rides his bike back to his friends while Mussolini's speech keeps playing on speakers all over the city. They say nice things about his new bike when he gets there, and then sit down to watch Malèna walk down the street. Malèna is the daughter of their Latin teacher, Professor Bonsignor. As she walks by, the group speeds away on their bikes several times to keep an eye on her. Renato stares at her hard every chance he gets because he thinks she is beautiful. The group of friends goes to Latin class later. Renato thinks about Malèna all day, still amazed by her beauty. The next day, the friends hang out by a cliff and talk about Malèna while judging their manhood. Renato's friend talks about meeting Malèna, which bothers Renato and makes him tease his friend. After that, Renato skips school and rides his bike to Malèna's house, where he daydreams about Malèna calling out to him and asking for cigarettes. But his daydream ends when he looks at Malèna's house and sees that the doors are closed. At home, his father is very angry with him for not going to school, getting teased by his friends, and getting his pants fixed. Renato sneaks out of his room late that night and goes back to Malèna's house. He climbs a tree and looks inside the house through a hole in the window. Malèna is lying down on a couch. He watches Malèna move around while she listens to the radio. Then he sees a picture of her husband, Nino Scordia. The next day, the men in a barber shop talk about Malèna and how Nino brought her to their town while he was fighting in the war. Renato complains to the barber when his number is called, asking why he can't sit in the adult's chair. The barber tells him he's still too young, of course. Renato goes back to Malèna's house after getting a haircut. He uses a telescope to spy on her while she dries herself in her garden. Later, Renato climbs up to the window and peeks through a hole to watch her work on her sewing machine. Renato is surprised to see that Malèna's dress is slipping a little and showing a part of her body as he watches. Later, when it's time for her to go back to her room, she starts dancing with a picture of Nino while a song plays in the background. Renato goes to a music store the next morning and asks for a copy of the song that is playing in Malèna's house. Once he gets home, he listens to the song while looking at crude pictures of women. As he falls asleep, he imagines that all of them are Malèna. The next day, Renato goes back to the cliff where he and his friends had been hanging out and tries to write a letter to Malèna. There, he says that he doesn't care about what people say in town, and that, after her husband, he's the only man for her. Renato then goes back to his friends, who are racing to find Malèna again. Then, he comes up with a reason to leave his friends and catch up with Malèna before they do. Men from the town watch her walk down the road when he sees her. The men say hello to her, but she just keeps walking and staring at the ground. One man says hello to her by kissing her hand over and over, and the other men look on with envy. Malèna looks at Lieutenant Katie, who is standing by a balcony for a moment before quickly taking her eyes off of him. Renato sees her catch a key for a door that leads to an apartment as she gets to her destination. Later, some of the Latin students make rude jokes about Malèna and about Renato, who they think is disgusting. Renato waits until the students reach the stairs bottom and then spits on them. Renato then goes to a bike mechanic to get his bike fixed, and from there he sees Malèna again. Renato could only look at her while the other women in town talked about how sick Malèna made them feel. One woman says she is like Gina, a town escort. Malèna goes back to her apartment, and Renato is still right behind her. He then climbs the nearby gate to see who Malèna is looking at. When he does, he sees that it is Malèna's father. Later that night, Renato is at home listening to the song again while touching himself and thinking about Malèna the whole time. The next day, During morning exercises, one of Renato's friends tells him that Nino Scordia died in battle. Later, Renato attends a memorial for Nino. During the memorial, two girls talk about how handsome Lieutenant Katie is as they look at him and giggle. When Renato goes back to Professor Bonsignor's apartment after leaving, he finds Malèna crying in bed because her husband has died. Renato imagines that he goes to Malèna's side, comforts her, and tells her he'll always be there for her. Malèna then hugs him. Later, during Nino's funeral procession, Malèna pretends to be the Virgin Mary. She looks terrible, and Renato watches her from below, worried. After the procession, he hears some people in town talking about Malèna and saying bad things about her again. This makes Renato angry, so he spits in their drinks and pees in their bags. Renato then goes to a church and prays to a saint, asking him to keep the townspeople away from Malèna. Renato leaves the theater and soon sees Malèna coming out of a store. When Renato overhears the men from the store talking badly about her, he throws a rock at the store, breaking the window, and then rides away. After that, Renato sits near Malèna's house as a battalion of German soldiers walks by. Renato walks over to Malèna's yard and grabs a pair of her underwear as she walks into her house. He then runs back to his bike and heads home. Renato touches himself again when he gets back to his room. He holds Malèna's underwear close to him and thinks about them being together until he falls asleep. The next day, Renato's father went into his room and saw that Renato was still sleeping with her underwear over his head. Renato's father has a fit and tells him he's ashamed of him. The rest of Renato's family figures out what's going on. Renato's father yells at him and then locks him in his room while Renato's mother burns the underwear and cries. Renato's mother is worried about him because he hasn't eaten in 3 days. Then she says that the fascists are mean to them. The next day, a doctor checks up on Renato, and he tells his family that he needs to leave. After that, Renato rides his bike back to Malèna's house, but this time there are more people and cars on the streets. Katie and some other men are looking at Malèna's house when he gets there. As the day goes on, Renato is in class writing a report when a man walks in and gives Professor Bonsignior a letter. Someone wrote in the letter that the professor feels ashamed because his daughter has been sleeping with everyone in town. The professor leaves his class because he is sad, leaving the students to talk about the letter. Renato fights one of the students because he was made fun of, and he does this while imagining himself as a gladiator for Malèna. Renato goes to Malèna's house at night and finds Lieutenant Katie there talking to her. Renato is upset by what he sees, especially when Lieutenant Katie kisses Malèna before leaving. On his way out, the lieutenant runs into Dr. Cusimano, who is a dentist. The dentist tells him off for bothering Malèna, whom he calls his fiancée. Lieutenant Katie is hit by Cusimano first. At first, the lieutenant doesn't fight back, but when he's hit a second time, he does. The two get into a fight, and it doesn't take long for Dr. Cusimano's wife to show up with the police. She gets very angry and calls her husband a cheater. While the police try to break up the fight between the men, she goes to Malèna's house, curses her, and tells her to steal husbands from her own village instead. Renato, on the other hand, can only look on in shock as the police start to arrest the two fools. The next day, people talk about what happened last night and argue about who was at fault. Many people are shocked to hear that Malèna is said to have 2 lovers, and they also say that the professor quit his teaching job in shame. People also say that Malèna should go to court for trying to get a married man to leave his wife. Renato walks by and hears this, so he goes back to look for Malèna. When she gets back, Malèna tries to open the door to her dad's apartment, but the key doesn't work. From the sidelines, Renato can see that the professor has given up on his daughter, and he just stares at Malèna with a worried look on his face. Later, Malèna walks to the office of Attorney Centorbi and asks for help before going to court. Renato stands in the busy courtroom and watches as Malèna is tried. The judge then asks Malèna about the dentist and how they are related. Malèna tells the judge that Dr. Cusimano only came to her house once to give medicine to her father and that he lied about being her fiancé. Malèna tells the judge that her relationship with Lieutenant Katie has nothing to do with the law when he asks about her. But the judge tells Malèna that because of what happened, Lieutenant Katie was questioned as part of a court investigation before he was sent to Albania. Then he tells his clerk to write down what Lieutenant Katie said. Malèna is upset as she listens to the clerk tell everyone that Lieutenant Katie took his relationship with Malèna lightly and says that they were just friends. Then, attorney Sentorbi starts to speak with a lot of passion, defending Malèna and blaming Dr. Cusimano. He argues that Malèna's only crime is her beauty and that she only wants to start over after her loss. Malèna and attorney Sentorbi leave court together and go back to her house, where they dance while Renato watches from a window. Malèna and Sentorbi talk for a while before Sentorbi makes his move on her. He tells her that the only payment he wants is Malèna herself. Renato watches in horror as Sentorbi tries to force Malèna to love him by being in her face all the time. Renato moves to another branch to get a better view, but the branch breaks, causing the boy to fall. The next day, Renato returns to the church and talks to the saint. He tells the saint that he is sorry for what Malèna did the night before and that he forgives her. Then he tells the saint that he didn't protect Malèna. To make things fair, he breaks the saint's arm. Renato keeps thinking about Malèna in class, so he writes her a letter telling her he loves her and that she doesn't deserve a man like Sender. Renato then thinks his teacher is Malèna, but he is stopped when his teacher tells him he is doing the wrong activity. Renato walks out of class in a rage and pushes a statue, causing it to fall and break. After that, Renato is in the tailor shop with his family. Renato's father is having long pants made for him while he listens to the radio and hears about the constant bombings by the Allies. After he leaves the tailor, Renato then follows Sender, who is visiting his mother. Renato laughs as his mother hits him and yells at him because she doesn't like Malèna. After that, Renato went after Sender. He found him with a teary-eyed Malèna, and that's where he and Malèna broke up. Renato is happy to hear this, so he goes ahead to the barber shop. After this, Renato keeps following Malèna around while men bother her on the streets. She goes through an alley to avoid being seen, and then she suddenly slows down. When Renato sees this, he thinks Malèna is coming toward him, so he slows down as well. Malèna walks past him and goes to talk to Antonio, a man who feeds her, which makes him sad. Renato is watching when all of a sudden he hears loud engines. This means that the Allied planes have arrived, so Renato runs to his bike to get away as the Allies start bombing parts of the town. Renato runs to one of the destroyed buildings where soldiers are pulling Professor Bonsignor's body after the bombing run. Shortly after that, Malèna and the students that her father taught go to the professor's funeral. As he is being laid to rest, dozens of men line up to show their sorrow to Malèna. Renato also gets in line, but an older man cuts him off, and he eventually leaves when he sees more men talking to Malèna. After the funeral, Malèna goes home and cuts her hair and does the dishes while Renato stands at the door and does nothing. Renato has to hide when a car drives up to Malèna's house out of the blue. Salvatore, whom Antonio knows, gets out of the car and knocks on Malèna's door. She greets him and then invites him inside. Renato is crying as he looks through the hole in the window and sees Salvatore force himself on Malèna right away. So Renato has to come home in a rage. The next day, more Germans move into the town while Renato walks around until he sees Malèna. Malèna now has red hair and is wearing clothes that show a lot of skin, which completely stuns him. As she makes her way to a table, the men around her are amazed, and the women look at her with disgust. Malèna pulls out a cigarette with a blank expression and all the men around her offer her a lighter. Renato looks and feels sad. The next morning, Renato watches and listens as the men in the barber shop notice that Malèna's hair is now blonde. She is with Gina, the escort, and they serve the Germans there together. Because of this, Renato thinks about the horrible things Malèna and Gina do to the Germans in their hotel room before he passes out. Renato's parents pick him up at the barber shop and take him to church, where his mother has him exorcised because she thinks the devil is inside him. Then, they take him to a house by the sea where they do some ceremonies. Outside, Renato's father cries because he thinks that all Renato needs to do to stop being stupid is to sleep with a woman. Renato's father takes him to a brothel after the rituals. Once there, Renato carefully chooses an escort with dark hair. The two then go upstairs to a room and start hooking up. Later, the Allies enter the town, taking it away from German control. Renato is happy, and he rides in one of the American jeeps to show it. All of a sudden, a group of women rush into a building and pull Malèna out. The women start beating her in the streets and ripping her clothes off, making her look bad in front of everyone. Renato was horrified, but he couldn't stop the woman from cutting her hair and cursing her for sleeping with their husbands. After they were done, Malèna was left bloodied and helpless. She cried out in pain and shame until the women threw her out of town. Soon after that, Renato takes a ride to the train station and sees Malèna getting on. Renato watches the woman he wants most leave without ever being able to talk to her. A sad-looking man hung out with him and his friends on the cliff. Renato sits and looks at the record of the song he first heard at Malèna's house, then throws it off the cliff into the water. Back in town, a man gets out of a car that has just stopped. As he walks down the street, people recognize him. This shows that he is Nino Scordia, Malèna's husband who was thought to be dead. Renato follows Nino into his old home, where he is surprised to find refugees, and that his wife has gone missing. Renato keeps following Nino as he goes into an office in the United States. There, he talks to Renato about what happened to him. Nino then asks the Americans for help in a desperate attempt to find his wife. Nino goes to former government officials and asks if they know where Malèna is. Renato is still following him. The officials just laugh, which annoys Nino and makes him go up to them. One of them then hits Nino on the ground and leaves. Renato helps Nino get back on his feet after he has been hurt, and the man then goes home. Nino is sitting by the bed and thinking when Renato suddenly drops a letter next to him. Nino tries to catch up with the boy, but he ends up reading the letter and finding out that Malèna has always been true to him and has moved to Messina. Nino gets on a train to Messina, while Renato watches, because he has found something. Time goes by, and the town goes about its daily business. Renato is with a girl when everyone stops and stares at Nino and his wife Malèna, who have just found each other again. They go back to Castelcudo together. The people in the town could only stare at the couple in awe, and they don't pay any attention to anyone as they go back home. After that, Malèna walks through the market, where a dozen people look at her and make comments as she goes from store to store. Malèna turns around and smiles at the two women who are staring at her. They greet her back, and suddenly, everyone in the market returns to doing what they were doing before. Renato rides up on his bike when Malèna is done shopping, and he watches the person he has been obsessed with for a long time walk home. Some of the tomatoes fall out of her bag as she walks home. Renato helps her, and as he puts the tomato back in her bag, his hand brush is against hers. He finally talks to her and tells her to do well. Malèna nods her head and walks away. Renato thinks about Malèna as he watches her leave. He has been with many women, but Malèna is the only one he will never forget. That was all from the video. I hope you liked it. We've got a quick challenge that will change your life forever. All you have to do is subscribe and hit that notification bell, and you'll get 10 years of good luck for free. It's that easy.